Throughout history, numerous brutal methods of torture have been devised by mankind for purposes of punishment, interrogation, or sheer cruelty to act out sadistic fantasies. Torture devices are as old as we are. Here are 15 of the most notorious. Number 15. The Judas Cradle. The Judas Cradle is a testament to the extreme lengths humans have gone to in the past when designing instruments for torture and punishment. This particular method was employed during medieval times, where the quest for information or mere intimidation often took precedence over human rights and ethical considerations. The apparatus itself had an ominous design, featuring a pyramid-shaped seat. The sharp peak of this pyramid was the focal point for inflicting pain. The method involved suspending the victim, using a series of ropes, above the pyramid's tip. With precision and calculated cruelty, the torturer would control the victim's descent, ensuring that the point of the pyramid was aligned with sensitive areas of the body. Once positioned correctly, the victim was then methodically and slowly lowered towards the apex of the pyramid. As gravity and tension from the ropes played their parts, the pressure exerted on the individual's body became unbearable, leading to immense pain. The process was not quick, and the deliberate pace was intentional to prolong the discomfort and distress. Beyond the immediate physical pain, the psychological torment was equally intense. Victims were acutely aware of their vulnerable position and the impending agony. This technique wasn't just about causing pain, it was also about instilling fear. Number 14. The wheel, breaking wheel. Also known as the Catherine wheel, or simply the wheel, the breaking wheel crushed the limbs and bones of the condemned, sometimes over the course of several days. Victims were tied to a large wheel, which was then slowly revolved. As it turned, a torturer would strike the victim with a hammer or iron bar, breaking their bones. The victim was often left on the wheel to die. To this day, the breaking wheel stands as one of history's most gruesome methods of execution. Largely reserved for the worst criminals, its purpose was to inflict maximum pain and suffering, often before a large crowd. Those condemned to this punishment were either broken by the wheel or broken on the wheel. In the first, an executioner dropped a wheel on the victim to break their bones. In the second, the victim was tied to a wheel so that an executioner could systematically break their bones with a cudgel. Use of the wheel as a form of execution dates as far back as the Roman Empire to the time of the Emperor Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius. Number 13. The Scold's Bridle. The Scold's Bridle, also referred to as the brank, remains one of the darker remnants of societal control from the 16th to the 19th century. This apparatus was emblematic of the times, reflecting societal views towards outspoken or non-conforming women. Such women, often labeled as shrews, scolds, or those perceived to have loose morals, became the primary targets of this form of public punishment. The design of the Scold's Bridle was both simple and deviously effective. Made of metal, it resembled a mask or muzzle that was secured tightly around the head. Integrated into this muzzle was a metal bit, sometimes spiked, which was placed directly into the wearer's mouth. This not only prevented the individual from speaking, but also induced significant discomfort. While the immediate physical implications of wearing such a device were clear, the Scold's Bridle served dual purposes. Alongside the obvious aim of silencing the wearer, it was equally designed to degrade and humiliate. Wearing the bridle, women were often paraded through the streets of their town or village. This public spectacle served as a form of societal shaming, where the community was invited to mock, jeer, and sometimes even pelt the restrained individual with various objects. In retrospect, the Scold's Bridle offers profound insight into the ways societies have historically tried to control and subdue women's voices. It underscores the importance of societal progress and the continued need to champion women's rights and freedoms. Number 12. The Brazen Bull. An ancient Greek device, it was a hollow bronze statue of a bull in which victims were placed. Created as a horrifying torture device to roast humans alive, the brazen bull was designed for the tyrant Phalaris by his sculptor Perilaus. A fire was then lit underneath, slowly roasting the person inside. To add a cruel twist, the bull was designed to convert the victim's screams into the sounds of a bull. When the fire was stoked sufficiently, the poor soul would be thrown into the bull, where the heat of its metal body roasted him alive. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the brazen bull was its acoustic design. Built into its structure were a series of tubes and pipes. These were engineered in such a way that when a person inside screamed in pain, the sound, channeled through these tubes, emerged as the haunting bellow of a bull. Parallaeus believed that this transformation of human anguish into the sounds of an enraged animal would be an amusing spectacle for Phalaris. Number 11. The necklacing. Necklacing was reserved not for the white men who supported the apartheid system, but those deemed as traitors to the black community. In June 1986, a South African woman was burned to death on television. Her name was Maki Skosana, and the world watched in horror as anti-apartheid activists wrapped her up in a car tire, doused her with gasoline, and set her on fire. For most of the world, her screams of agony were their first experience with the public execution South Africans called necklacing. Necklacing was a horrible way to die. MBS would put a car tire around the arms and neck of their victim, wrapping them up in a twisted parody of a rubber necklace. Usually, the massive weight of a tire was enough to keep them from running, but some took it even further. Sometimes the mob would chop off their victims' hands or tie them behind their back with barbed wire to ensure they couldn't get away. Then they would set their victims on fire. While the flames rose and seared their skin, the tire around their necks would melt and cling like boiling tar to their flesh. The fire would still burn on, even after they died, incinerating the body until it was charred beyond recognition. Number 10. The Saw of Dead. Picture yourself being hung upside down by your feet. Your hands are tied behind you, and the weight of your own body and blood flowing to your head makes it difficult to scream as you see the saw about to sink into your flesh. You cannot struggle or beg for mercy, even as the metal teeth carve into the soft flesh between your thighs. Then comes the sawing of bone and cartilage. You pray for a fast death. But most of the blood has gone to your head, so blood loss is minimal, and the saw has yet to reach a vital organ. Your death will be slow and excruciating, and through the delirium of pain you can hear the sound of cheering during the Middle Ages. Accused witches and blasphemers find themselves victim to the saw torture. This method was invented by the Chinese and popularized by the Romans. The accused would be hung upside down by the ankles while two executioners saw the victim in half beginning between the legs. The upside-down position ensured that blood would pool in the victim's head, slowing the bleeding process, and therefore delaying death. It is rumored that the Emperor Caligula particularly enjoyed watching these deaths, while he ate, remarking that the suffering of the victims enhanced the flavor of his meals most remarkably. Death by sawing was a quiet one, as the position and motion of the saw through the pelvic bone inhibited the victim's ability to scream. Number 9. The Rotting Tub. Imagine being placed on your knees in a wooden or iron barrel with only your head protruding from the top. If you think what awaits you is just a long stay in an uncomfortable position. The truth was far worse. You would be given regular meals, but this was not to keep you healthy, as the barrel filled with urine and excrement. It would soon begin to attract insects and vermin that would begin to eat away at your flesh. Additionally, the bacteria from these bodily fluids would cause skin necrosis. This method of torture was also known as scaphism, or the Spanish mantle. Other forms of scaphism have been used throughout the centuries. An alternate form dates back to the Persians, who would hollow out a tree trunk and place the unfortunate victim inside. The victim would be naked with just the extremities protruding. Then the victim would be slathered with milk and honey, giving special attention to the eyes, mouth, and genital region. After the victim would be left in the sun or floating on a stagnant body of water as vermin and insects would begin to feast on the body. Death would occur as a result of blood loss and septic shock. Death by scaphism could last days. Number 8. The Four Horsemen. Perhaps you have fallen out of favor with the local government. Perhaps you have been labeled the troublemaker. Perhaps even treasonous or blasphemous. Now the authorities are tasked with silencing you before you can rile up any more followers. You have insulted the king. And there is only one acceptable punishment, but it comes in multiple steps, each which is deadly on its own. First comes the dragging through the streets of town. The public must see what happens to troublemakers like you next. Perhaps beheading or possibly having your limbs ripped from your torso by galloping horses. A popular punishment for treason in England was the act of hanging, drawing, and quartering. The method began by tying the accused by rope to a horse and dragging him to the gallows. Once hoisted up by the neck, the victim would possibly be disemboweled. However, over centuries, the act evolved into the practice of tying each of the victim's limbs to for individual horses, then setting each horse in opposite directions, thereby tearing the victim in pieces. Likely the most famous victim of this brutal death was the Scottish patriot Will Wallace, who suffered each step to the fullest extent. He was first hanged for robbery and murder, disemboweled for sacrilege, hanged, drawn, and beheaded for treason. His story was portrayed in the popular Mel Gibson movie Braveheart. Number 7. Concrete shoes. Have you made the uncomfortable mistake of borrowing money from a mob loan shark and now you can't pay, or perhaps you're a rat? The mafia has a tried and true method for dealing with the likes of you. The act of encasing a victim's feet in cement and tossing them into a body of water to drown has surely been the stuff of fiction, popularized as a tongue-in-cheek method of doing away with snitches by the American mafia. Cement shoes were thought to be purely the invention of crime fiction novelist Al Dr. O. However, in May of 2016, the body of 26-year-old Peter Martinez washed ashore. The body was wrapped in plastic bags, and most notably, his feet were encased in cement. Martinez was thought to be a member of a Brooklyn gang, and his murder has yet to be solved.
Martinez had been arrested 31 times.
Death by drowning is not often as peaceful and tranquil as it is portrayed in many movies and in television shows. The first instinct is to hold your breath, but as your body and brain starved for oxygen, the urge to inhale becomes too overwhelming, and you will do so involuntarily just before you lose consciousness, as water is sucked into the larynx. Your natural gag reflex is triggered, causing a chain reaction of alternating choking and suffocation. Perhaps you'll be one of the lucky ones, and water will fill your lungs quickly, hastening death. Even if your feet were free and not weighted by cement, you would probably be much too weak to swim to the surface. Number 6. Pair of anguish. This one goes out to the ladies. Have you been accused of adultery, perhaps witchcraft, or simply just stating your opinion when it would have been better suited? You hold your tongue. There is a special punishment in store for women who forget their place in the medieval age. A special device was used to punish homosexuals and women accused of various illicit acts. The device was a pear-shaped probe that would be inserted either rectally or vaginally. Once inserted, the device would be cranked, opening the instruments. Sharp pedals, this would internally eviscerate the victim as the device was twisted inside the instrument. Came in many convenient sizes depending on the orifice it was to be used in, including a smaller device meant to be placed in the mouth for blasphemers and liars. However, the pair of anguish was rarely fatal and was often used as just a precursor to more torture methods to be inflicted. Number 5. The rack. Lower back problems, stiff joints? While we've got a deal for you. The device is simple to use, but you will need the help of a partner. All you have to do is lay back on a wooden table. Allow your partner or assistant to strap your wrists and ankles, turn the crank, and voila. Your joint pains are cured forever because they will be non-existent. The rack dates all the way back to ancient Greece. The concept was simple. A victim strapped to a table and bound by the wrists and ankles. Then a wheel would be cranked, activating a system of pulleys and levers, gradually lengthening the table and stretching the victim's body. As more and more strain was put on the victim's joints, they would eventually dislocate. Muscle tissue would tear, and before long the joints would separate entirely if the torture continued long enough. Limbs would be torn completely away from the body. Due to its simplicity, the torture rack was a popular device throughout Europe during the Middle Ages and was a particular favorite for extracting information from the Knights of Templar. The second Duke of Exeter also fell victim to the torture rack in 1447 within the walls of the Tower of London, if you have seen any of. Number 4. The heretic's fork. The Saw films, you have seen devices of torture and death that are as complicated as a Rube Goldberg machine, devices with timers, intricate pulley systems, and innovative complexity. However, a torture device doesn't need to be complicated to be effective. The heretic's fork was a simple design, a double-edged fork strapped to a victim's neck, preventing the wearer from being able to lower the head or speak. This was a particularly effective method during the Spanish Inquisition to force confessions from those accused of heresy. The irony in using this device for confessions was that since the victim could not speak, no confession could be uttered, prolonging the torture. If the wearer bent awkward far enough, the pain would temporarily cease. However, such a position was impossible to maintain for long periods, and eventually the victim would either attempt a confession or give in to the sharp points of the fork. If the victim decided to succumb to death, it would be a slow and painful one, as the accused would slowly bleed out from the puncture wounds most of us have. Number 3. The iron chair. Seen magicians and performance artists perform the feat of lying on a bed of nails only to rise again unharmed. While this trick appears impressive, it is reliant on the simple fact that the body's weight is evenly distributed among the points of the nails, making no one point strong enough to penetrate the skin. However, the simply named chair of torture was a completely different matter. A prisoner would be restrained to a wooden chair adorned with up to 1,500 spikes along the back seat and armrests, as the sharp points of the spikes buried into the skin. The victim would slowly bleed out, making death slow and excruciating, and some variations of the torture chair holes were put in the bottom of the chair so that a fire could be placed beneath it, adding another interesting level to the prisoner's torment the art of torture isn't. Number 2. The Spanish donkey. Might sound like an overpriced cocktail, but the pain it delivered was far worse than a hangover. Otherwise known as the wooden horse or chevalet, it was a torture device utilized by Jesuits, Civil War soldiers, and even Paul Revere himself. While there were numerous iterations of the implement, all known versions essentially operated in the same manner. According to History of Yesterday, the Spanish donkey was typically constructed out of wood. The earliest known model was built in the shape of a triangular prism on stilts, with victims forced to straddle the sharp corner of the wedge. A sharp wedge on which the victim was made to sit, with weights attached to their feet. The weight would force the wedge deeper into the body, causing excruciating pain. Number 1. Boiling alive. As the name suggests, victims were boiled alive in large cauldrons or pots. This method was used as capital punishment in some cultures. Boiling someone to death was an unspeakably agonizing endeavor. Though the Roman Emperor Nero reportedly killed thousands of Christians with this method long before the Middle Ages, it would also become a popular way of punishing coin forgers, especially in the Holy Roman Empire. The sensation of being boiled alive was an absolutely horrific one. The method could be made even worse if the water had yet to reach boiling temperatures by the time the person was submerged. All who went through this medieval execution could only pray for a fast and merciful death. But boiling to death was unfortunately a very slow process. A quick death would only come if the liquid was already boiling when the victim was dunked in. They might also be able to speed up the process if they ducked their head underneath the liquid to boil their brain. But otherwise, it was long and torturous until the very end. So which one of these torture devices scare you the most?